There is a question this series did not ask at the beginning, not because it was unimportant, but because it could only be asked after everything we have seen all 6 episodes. All 7 centuries had been placed side by side. The question is not, were these prophecies real? It is not, was the Vatican lying? Both are reasonable questions. Neither is the one this series has actually been building toward. The question, the one that emerges after a hermit on a mountain, a crusading army drowning in the Nile Delta, a forged document running through 5 centuries of conclaves, a friar burning in the square where he burned the Vanities, a bullet placed in a crown. Is this what happens when an institution claims authority it cannot fully demonstrate? What must it do, generation after generation, to keep that claim alive? This final episode is not trying to answer with a verdict. It is trying to do something harder and perhaps more useful, to look back at everything we have seen and name as precisely as possible what the mechanism is, who it serves, and what it reveals not just about the Vatican, but about how institutions and the people inside them live with a distance between belief and proof. Let us start with what actually happened. Not interpretation, not pattern, just the events. In order, after 27 months of deadlock, the College of Cardinals elected an 84-year-old hermit as Pope. Pietro di Moroni wept when the delegation climbed the mountain to inform him. He ruled 5 months, made decisions that alienated the institutional power around him, and resigned. His successor imprisoned him in the castle of Fumone. Celestine died there 18 months later. This did not happen in a vacuum. It happened inside a tradition decades of Joachimite and spiritual Franciscan thought that had been describing, in advance, an angelic pope who would come and reform the church. When Celestine failed and was imprisoned, the template was not abandoned. It was reinterpreted. 1217, 1221. The Fifth Crusade arrived in Egypt, convinced final victory was imminent. The Crusaders were offered peace twice, including the return of Jerusalem. They refused both times. Cardinal Pelagius, the papal legate, believed God had promised total victory. Accepting anything less would be a failure of faith. The campaign advanced into the Nile Delta in summer, was trapped by the annual flooding, and surrendered on worse terms than the offers it had refused. The failure did not break the prophetic framework. It was absorbed. Frederick II had not come. The Crusaders had sinned. The cause remained valid for the next attempt. A document appeared in a papal conclave attributed to St. Malachy, a 12th century Irish abbot containing 112 cryptic Latin phrases describing every pope until the end of the world. No one could verify its origins. Its accuracy for earlier popes worked because those entries were written after the fact. Its accuracy for future popes worked because the phrases were ambiguous enough to fit almost anyone. That document has been shared at every major papal succession for more than 400 years. 1,491, 1,498. A Dominican friar in Florence claimed divine revelation about coming punishment for the city. Savonarola's prophecies, combined with his rhetorical power and Florence's genuine political instability, elevated him to effective control of one of the most sophisticated cities in Europe. He built the New Jerusalem. It collapsed. He was burned alive in the same square where he had burned the Vanities. 1,917, 2,000. 3 children in rural Portugal reported apparitions, including a sealed prophecy, the third secret sent to the Vatican. John III read it in 1960 and did not publish it. John Paul II read it in a hospital bed after being shot on the anniversary of the first Fatima apparition. He placed the bullet removed from his body into the crown of the statue of Our Lady of Fatima. The Soviet Union collapsed. The third secret was published in 2000. The debate about whether the publication was complete continues today. 1,252,026. A template, the Angelic Pope who will transform the institution, was created as critique from the margins, opposed by the institution for centuries, and then domesticated, its language absorbed into the institution's own aspirational vocabulary. The template continues to be applied to every new pope. It is circulating right now. 6 cases, 7 centuries. Laid out like this, no interpretation. Just the sequence. The first thing visible is their diversity. Different actors, different contexts, different centuries. At first glance, they seem too different to belong to the same story, but something connects them. Not a conspiracy, not a coordinated policy, something more structural. Before naming it, one thing needs to be said about the nature of these cases. They are not equally deliberate. Whoever wrote the Malachy document knew they were forging. That was calculated deception. It failed immediately and succeeded beyond any imaginable degree across 4 centuries. Pelagius was not calculating. By every available piece of evidence, he genuinely believed the framework had become indistinguishable from reality. He could not update it against the evidence because the framework was the lens through which he was reading the evidence. Lucia Santos was not deceiving, but memory is not a recording. The institutional context in which her memory was transcribed in 1941 shaped what was transcribed in ways that neither she nor the institution necessarily controlled. The Vatican's management of the third secret between 1960 and 2000 was not a single decision by a single person. It was a sequence of individual choices, each defensible in its moment, accumulating into something that looked, from the outside, like deliberate suppression, deception, genuine belief, institutional logic. Memory, all 4 contributed to the same outcomes. This is why the Vatican lied is not exactly wrong, but it is not enough. The structure that produced the outcome matters more than any single actor inside it. What do the 6 cases share? 3 steps, visible in each one. Step 1. A claim is made that cannot be fully verified through observable evidence. The Church has divine authority. The Crusade is divinely approved. This document originates from a 12th century saint. His friar received revelation from God. This child was visited by the Virgin Mary. Step 2. That claim creates a gap. The Church claims divine authority but imprisons an 84-year-old predecessor for political convenience. The Crusade claims divine favor and drowns in the Nile Delta. The document claims a medieval origin no one can verify. The secret claims to be revelation but sits sealed for 40 years. Step 3. The gap is filled not by withdrawing the claim, but by a narrative that makes the gap's existence consistent with it. The institution's failures are temporary trials. The Crusade failed because of Frederick II's absence. The Crusader sins not because the prophetic judgment was wrong. The third secret was not hidden. It was managed at the appropriate moment, for appropriate reasons. Claim, gap-filling narrative. What is being claimed about this pattern, and what is not, needs to be stated clearly. This is not a claim that all gap-filling narratives are false. The Church may have divine authority in ways secular analysis cannot measure. Lucia Santos may genuinely have been visited by the Virgin Mary. What is being claimed is narrower, as a matter of observable historical record. The 3-step structure produces misinformation, specifically when the gap-filling narrative is inaccurate and is still distributed as accurate. The Malachy document was not written by Saint Malachy. That is a matter of textual history. not interpretation. The gap-filling claim is demonstrably false. That is misinformation. The 1941 version of the second secret is more specific about pre-war events than could have been recorded in 1917. That is a matter of text and chronology. The claim that it preserves a direct 1917 wording is unproven on the historical record. That is also misinformation. For the deeper claims the Church's divine authority, the nature of the Fatima visions this series takes no position. Those belong to the domain of belief. 4 conditions appear in every case. Uncertainty each case occurred when simple answers were unavailable. Prolonged conclaves. Total warfare. The question of what was happening to the Soviet Union in 1989. Uncertainty creates demand for answers. The prophetic narrative supplies them. Ambiguity. Each prophetic claim was specific enough to feel meaningful and vague enough to fit multiple outcomes. A holy reforming pope is coming applies to nearly any new pope. Russia will be converted can be read many ways. The Holy Father will suffer greatly will be accurate for most popes who live long enough. Confirmation. Each system could point to at least one outcome as evidence of accuracy. The second secret had the Soviet collapse. The Malachy document had its entries for earlier popes because they were written afterward. Institutionalization. Each tradition was managed by structures with the power to confirm or reject or interpret or suppress. The institution did not always create the narratives, but it decided which ones circulated. These 4 conditions appear in 1294 with Celestine. They appear in 1590 with the Malachy document. They appear in 1981. When a pope read a sealed text in a hospital bed on the anniversary of its first apparition and later placed the bullet in a crown. Same conditions. Different century. Same structure. There is one idea connecting all 6 cases. Not sacred misinformation, though that is real. Not the Vatican lied, though specific people within the institution did lie. At specific moments. The idea is this. Any institution that claims authority beyond what it can demonstrate will tend to live with a persistent gap between claim and observable reality. That gap requires management. And across the cases in this series, prophetic narrative has been one of the most durable tools for managing that gap. The Catholic Church is not the only institution with this problem. Any institution claiming privileged access to transcendent truth faces the same structural bind. The Vatican is treated here as one of the clearest and longest-running Western cases of this institution doing what this institution does, not the only case, but the one with the longest record and the most surviving documentation. Why prophecy? Rather than theology or ritual or institutional memory? Because prophecy converts the gap from a contradiction into a drama. Without it, the gap is simply a contradiction. The Church claims divine authority. The Church operates with evident human failure. The observer must choose, accept the explanation, revise the assessment, or walk away. With a prophetic narrative, the gap becomes a story with a direction. The corruption is real. Savonarola built his entire career by naming it, and the institution could not deny it without appearing to endorse what he was condemning. But the corruption is temporary. The Angelic Pope is coming. The third secret contains what is needed. The consecration, properly performed, will produce the promised result. Contradiction becomes narrative, and narrative can be lived inside. This does not make the narrative false. It means the narrative serves a function regardless of whether it is true, and that function is what makes it durable, transmissible, and difficult to dislodge by argument alone. When the Malachy document is exposed as a forgery, the exposure addresses the document. It does not address the need the document met. That need attaches to the next available vehicle. This is why Celestine's failure in 1294 did not end the Angelic Pope tradition, why the Fifth Crusade's failure did not end crusade preaching, Why the publication of the third secret in 2000 did not end speculation about whether what was published was complete. The exposure addresses the specific instance. The gap remains. Did the Vatican know it was doing this? The answer is, sometimes yes, sometimes no, and often somewhere between where genuine belief and institutional calculation coexist in ways that cannot be cleanly separated. The yes case is clear. The Malachy document. Someone wrote it knowing Saint Malachy had not. That was deliberate deception. And the institution's subsequent centuries of neither endorsing nor condemning it constitutes a sustained management decision. The no case is also clear. Pelagius at the Fifth Crusade. He genuinely believed. The framework had become the reality. His refusal of Jerusalem was not calculation, it was conviction. The catastrophe that followed does not make the conviction less real. It makes it more dangerous. The in-between case is the one that characterizes most of what this series has examined. John Leck XXIII read the third secret in 1960 and decided not to publish it. That decision may have been genuine pastoral judgment. It also produced 40 years of growing expectation that made the secret more institutionally significant than its actual content would support a benefit the institution did not actively refuse. Both things can be simultaneously true. That is precisely what makes the institutional analysis difficult. Here is the part that is hardest to see from the outside. The Vatican is not only the creator of the mechanism, it is also, in impotent ways, trapped by it. When the Vatican confirmed the authenticity of the Fatima visions in 1930, it made a rationally defensible institutional decision. It also created an obligation. If the visions were authentic, the third secret sitting in an envelope not yet arrived at Rome was already, by the institution's own confirmation, genuinely significant revelation. And then the institution had to manage something it had already certified as divine, while choosing not to disclose it. That bind is not the product of cynicism. It is the product of a sequence of decisions, each reasonable in its moment, that accumulated into a position no individual actor had designed. When John Paul II read the third secret in a hospital bed on May 13th, 1981, on the anniversary of the first apparition, recovering from a bullet that had missed his aorta by millimeters, he was not a neutral observer examining an unfamiliar document. He was not a neutral reader. He was a man formed in Catholic Poland, trained in Catholic theology, and marked by Nazism, communism, and an assassination attempt. Reading a text for which the entire architecture of his life had prepared him to see himself, his conclusion that the text described his own fate was not naive. It was the consistent response of a person who had lived inside the mechanism long enough for the mechanism to have become the structure through which he perceived reality. The institution was not manipulating him. The institution and he were both inside a structure that neither had designed and neither could simply step outside of. That is what it means to be trapped inside a mechanism you helped build. This does not mean no one was responsible for specific choices. The author of the Malachy document made a choice. Boniface VIII chose to imprison a dying 84-year-old rather than permit his continued freedom. John Leck XXIII chose not to explain his decision not to publish in terms that would have made the actual reasoning transparent. The Vatican in the decades after 1960 maintained an ambiguity around the third secret that sustained institutional interest without requiring institutional disclosure. These are moments where specific people made specific choices that served institutional interests while not serving the honest transmission of accurate information. Naming those moments is not the same as indicting everything the institution has ever done. But declining to name them, dissolving them entirely into institutional logic is also not honest. Both things are true. The structure produces these outcomes with or without bad actors. And specific actors made the outcomes worse than they needed to be. After 7 centuries and 6 cases, What remains is not a verdict. It is a set of observations offered not as final conclusions, but as what appears most clearly after looking at this material long enough. The first observation: this is not primarily a story about deception. Savonarola did not deceive in any simple sense. He believed. Lucia Santos did not deceive. Her memory, recorded 24 years after the event, inside an institutional framework with specific interests in its content, is a more complicated document than either a lie or a perfect transcript. The Malachy forger deceived. That document would not have lasted 4 centuries on deception alone. It lasted because it met a genuine need. The need for prophetic confirmation in conclaves. The need to find meaning in succession. The need to feel that the institution's future is oriented towards something rather than simply undetermined. The need does not disappear when the specific document is exposed. This is the mechanism, not deception as its engine, but need. The deception is opportunistic, not foundational. The second observation: the pattern is not uniquely Catholic. The Vatican is treated in this series as one of the clearest, long-duration Western cases of this institutional dynamic, not the only one. Any institution claiming authority it cannot fully verify through observable evidence faces the same structural bind. Protestant churches have navigated it. Political movements claiming privileged access to historical inevitability have navigated it. Scientific institutions claiming more certainty than their evidence supports have navigated versions of it. What makes the Catholic case useful is scale, duration, and documentation. The mechanism is visible here because it has been running for so long. In Detail, with so many surviving records. The Vatican is a window onto something general. The third observation: the gap-filling narrative serves the people inside it, not only the institution. The hundreds of thousands of people who arrived at Fatima for the anniversary pilgrimages were not passively receiving misinformation. They brought the tradition into their lives. They organized their devotional practice around it. They found in it resources for living with grief, uncertainty, and the question of whether history means anything at all. The gap-filling narrative does not only serve institutional interests. It serves the genuine human need for meaning, the need to feel that suffering has purpose, that history is moving towards something, that the specific moment you are living in is not random noise. Any analysis that does not account for that need is not being honest about why the mechanism works. The fourth observation: what this series has arrived at is not an answer. It is a more precisely stated question. This series began asking why prophecies survive, why they spread, why they resist correction, why they keep reattaching to new events after old ones fail to confirm them. What emerged, across 6 cases in 7 centuries, is that this question cannot be answered without asking something larger. What is it about the way human beings build institutions that makes the appeal to unverifiable authority so consistently attractive, and the management of the gap between that authority and observable reality so consistently necessary? A question may not resolve cleanly, but it is the more honest question, and arriving at it, after all of this, feels like something worth having done. There is a building in Rome. Inside it, periodically, men in red robes gather and vote. When one of them receives 2/3 of the other's support, white smoke rises. A crowd gathers, and a man walks out onto a balcony and introduces himself. And the world responds as if this means something beyond the election of an institutional administrator. The 7 centuries this series has examined have loaded that moment with more accumulated expectation than any single event can hold: sealed envelopes and bullets and crowns and documents written by people pretending to be 12th century saints. Genuine mystical experience processed through institutional machinery. All the complexity and occasional moral failure of a human institution living inside claims it cannot fully prove. The gap has not closed. It is hard to imagine that it will. The 3 children at Covid area saw something on May 13th. What they saw, we cannot know. What they reported, the institution processed. What the institution processed, the mechanism distributed, and what the mechanism distributed is still running in the debates about the 2000 publication, in the discussion of whether the 2022 consecration was valid, in the next conclave, in the next figure on the next balcony. Everything this series has examined: the Angelic Pope who never came, the crusade that refused Jerusalem, the forged list, the burned friar, the sealed secret. A bullet in the crown is what has been built across 7 centuries. To live inside that gap, whether that building is a cage or a cathedral, depends on where you are standing. But it is, without question, still standing.